For decades, Burkina Faso lived under that small reputation. Many of its people scraped by in rural villages, where nights fell into total darkness, schools struggled without electricity, and hospitals could hardly keep life-saving equipment running. But that old picture is starting to blur. In its place is a new, almost unbelievable story of ambition and daring. Right now, Burkina Faso is building something so large it seems impossible at first glance. An $800 billion hydroelectric project that promises to light up not just Burkina Faso, but an entire corner of Africa. The man behind this bold vision is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young leader who came to power in 2022 after a military shakeup. In a place that's known more for coups and political upheaval than massive engineering.
Imagine living your entire life under someone else's switch, knowing they could flip it off at any moment and your country would plunge into darkness. Now imagine standing up, grabbing that switch and saying, "This is ours now." That's exactly what Burkina Faso is doing. And it's shaking the foundations of power from West Africa all the way to Europe. Right now, far from glossy European boardrooms and IMF conference tables, a quiet revolution is crackling through the copper wires of Burkina Faso. In a world where the simple act of turning on a light is political, this new African power grid is not just a project, it's a declaration of independence. We've long been told that Africa's biggest problem is poverty, but scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find that much of that so-called poverty has been carefully engineered, or at least carefully maintained. In Burkina Faso's case, the story starts with electricity. For decades, Burkina Faso was forced to live under the shadow of energy contracts designed and dictated by foreign companies. Vast sums were borrowed from European banks to build infrastructure that somehow never quite belonged to Burkinabe. Multi-decade concessions meant French and German firms controlled who got electricity, how much it cost, and which towns stayed dark. Whenever local leaders pushed back, the threats were rarely shouted. They were whispered, through phone calls, sudden funding delays, technical complications. Energy blackmail at its most sophisticated. Take Ouagadougou just a few years ago. Rolling blackouts were so common that entire neighborhoods would schedule their days around when they expected the power to vanish. Hospitals ran diesel generators that guzzled precious foreign currency. Meanwhile, European conglomerates continued collecting management fees, often paid in advance through aid programs ironically labeled development. But all of that is changing, and it's starting right here in the red heart of Burkina Faso. This new power grid isn't just an upgrade, it's a complete reimagining of who controls the switch. Designed with an ambitious mix of solar, hydro, and emerging micronuclear pilots, it's meant to break the dependence on imported fuels and fragile cross-border deals that could be shut off by a single political decision. Under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a man dismissed by many Western outlets as merely a military strongman, Burkina Faso has taken on the colossal challenge of building a power backbone that puts Burkinabe first. It's already delivering early results. Villages that once counted daylight hours because candles were too expensive are now stringing up bulbs and staying open late into the night. Farmers are hooking up electric water pumps, giving birth to a second planting season that was unthinkable just 3 years ago. More profoundly, there's a new conversation taking place in living rooms and market stalls. What if we never have to ask permission again to keep our lights on? That simple idea is exploding across social media. Videos of newly lit clinics, children jumping at the thrill of electric fans, old men wiping away tears at the first street lamp in their village. These clips aren't just viral content, they're rallying cries, but behind the hopeful images is a delicate balancing act. Traoré's government is painfully aware of the stakes. They've watched what happened to leaders in other African countries who tried to take too much control of their natural resources. Sudden coups, frozen assets, whisper campaigns painting them as tyrants, or worse, subtle sabotage of the very projects meant to lift their people. Still, Burkina Faso is pressing forward. Because for many here, it's no longer just about electricity, it's about dignity, about standing up and finally breaking the invisible chains of contracts written in Paris and Brussels. Contracts that decided for decades who would prosper and who would wait in the dark. And maybe that's why this story isn't just Burkina Faso's anymore. From Mali to Sierra Leone, from Togo to Guinea, ordinary Africans are watching closely. They're asking their leaders hard questions. If Burkina Faso can do this, why can't we? Next, in part 2, we'll dive into how this was even possible. the secret negotiations, the unlikely partners, and the quiet panic now spreading through old European energy circles. But before we continue, let us know what you think. Is this Burkina Faso's moment to finally flip the switch for all of Africa? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, like, and share this story so more people see how the continent is rewriting its destiny. How did one of Africa's poorest nations leapfrog its way out of energy dependence while others stayed tangled in the same old contracts? The answer is a cocktail of courage, new alliances, and old powers getting caught flat-footed. The story of Burkina Faso's power grid might sound like a miracle, but dig deeper and you'll find a meticulously crafted gamble. Because after decades of dependency, this tiny Sahel nation wasn't going to be handed freedom on a silver platter. Let's start with the money. Major Western lenders simply weren't interested. Or if they were, their offers came tied up with demands that would have handed control right back to European management firms. So Captain Traoré's team quietly took a different route, forging a patchwork of deals with partners who wouldn't demand the same geopolitical strings. Russia was first to see an opening. Desperate to expand its global influence as sanctions choked its ties with Europe, Moscow offered Burkina Faso expertise on small modular nuclear systems designed for exactly these off-grid, high-temperature environments. Unlike sprawling legacy reactors, these units can power entire provinces with a fraction of the infrastructure, and crucially, under direct local ownership. Next came Turkey, eager to plant its own flag in West Africa's growing infrastructure market. Turkish companies offered ultra-competitive bids on transmission lines, even agreeing to local capacity clauses that train Burkinabe engineers to maintain and eventually expand the system without foreign technicians. This was a stark contrast to European models that intentionally left local workforces dependent on overseas experts. Meanwhile, Chinese private investors, already savvy at navigating Africa's shifting sands, stepped in to bankroll vast solar farms. But here's the twist. Instead of the typical debt traps seen elsewhere, Burkina Faso's contracts insist on profit sharing, where the majority of net earnings flow straight into local reinvestment funds, earmarked for schools, roads, and microloans for rural entrepreneurs. All of this took place far from international headlines. No splashy ribbon cuttings with EU dignitaries, no IMF press releases, just quiet diplomacy, frequent trips to Ankara, Moscow, Shanghai, and a relentless insistence that Burkina Faso's sovereignty was non-negotiable. But this new coalition came at a cost. Geopolitical shivers running all the way to Europe's financial capitals. In Paris, internal policy memos leaked to journalists showed growing alarm. They weren't worried only about losing contracts. They were terrified of a domino effect. If Burkina Faso proved a fully African-owned grid could thrive, why wouldn't Niger, fresh from its own post-French pivot, do the same? Or Mali, already inching away from old CFA-based financial control? The panic became so pronounced that European investment agencies began quietly tightening their loan risk assessments for the entire West African region, hoping to discourage other countries from striking similar energy independence deals. Some ECOWAS delegates even reported receiving thinly veiled warnings that pursuing non-aligned energy structures could jeopardize future funding for unrelated projects like highways or hospitals. Yet Burkina Faso pressed on, because at home the mood was electric, literally. Small towns like Yako and Dédougou, which once lost entire harvests waiting for costly diesel to power irrigation, are now seeing bumper crops. Clinics that buried premature babies because incubators couldn't stay on overnight are now keeping their tiniest patients alive. Local blacksmiths and welders are staying open past sunset, hiring more apprentices. There's also a profound psychological shift underway. Teachers report children are arriving at school with sharper focus simply because they studied under proper light the night before. Small restaurants are popping up along once dark highways, their owners talking proudly about being part of a new Burkina. Meanwhile, on social media, videos of the expanding grid, cheerful power line crews in dusty boots, and first-time light switch celebrations are going viral across Francophone Africa. Young Malians and Guineans are flooding comment sections with a mix of awe and envy. When will our leaders do this? When will we stop begging? And that is the quiet revolution no foreign power quite knows how to contain. Next, in Part 3, we'll explore the building tensions inside ECOWAS itself, the whispers of sabotage, and how Burkina Faso is preparing for potential retaliation. Not just economic, but possibly even covert attempts to stop this model from spreading. What if one country's freedom becomes another's nightmare? That's the uncomfortable question echoing through ECOWAS conference halls right now, all because Burkina Faso decided to flip its own switch. As this new African power grid hums to life, its quiet current is carrying more than just electricity. It's also carrying a bold message. We don't need to beg anymore. But that message is splitting opinions across West Africa. Inside recent ECOWAS meetings in Abuja and Accra, the mood is tense. Officially, the body praises regional infrastructure integration. Unofficially, there's alarm. Because Burkina Faso's grid doesn't just integrate with old colonial-built lines, it bypasses many of them entirely. Countries like Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, who have long benefited from re-exporting European-managed electricity deals across borders, now face a looming question. Will they lose both leverage and lucrative fees if neighbors go self-sufficient? Some regional ministers, under polite diplomatic language, are lobbying Burkina Faso to slow down the rollout and consider harmonizing tariff structures, thinly veiled code for staying plugged into old economic patterns that send money flowing back to certain capitals, and by extension, European financiers. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso's leadership isn't blind to the growing diplomatic frost. Sources close to Captain Traoré say he's been receiving more subtle warnings. Invitations to international forums that used to pour in have suddenly dried up. European development envoys are showing up less often in Ouagadougou, or coming with lines about governance standards that were suspiciously absent back when European firms were raking in profits. And there are darker whispers, too. An intelligence memo leaked last month claimed certain West African power brokers have even begun exploring supply disruption tactics, quietly pressuring fuel transit companies to delay shipments of diesel and lubricants needed for Burkina Faso's backup systems, hoping to spark local frustration. If true, it's a risky gambit that could backfire spectacularly. But here's what might surprise the outside world most. In Burkina Faso's dusty villages, people know these geopolitical games are happening, and they simply don't care. Talk to a farmer near Bobo Dioulasso who can now run an electric water pump for his small vegetable patch, or a group of mothers at a maternity clinic in Tenkodogo whose babies no longer risk life-threatening infections from failed refrigeration. They'll tell you, let the politicians scheme. We just want to keep our lights on. For decades, electricity here wasn't just a utility, it was a barometer of who mattered and who didn't. The capital might flicker to life for visiting dignitaries while entire rural prefectures stayed dark for months. Now, with decentralized mini-grids feeding off Burkina Faso's new backbone, these same overlooked communities are finally seeing their share. It's almost poetic. The poorest regions, once used as sad statistics in donor pitches, are now the showcase for what real independence can deliver. But this new pride doesn't erase the undercurrent of fear. Older residents still recall the sudden collapses of other promising experiments across Africa. Leaders overthrown, projects mysteriously stalled, foreign aid yanked at the worst possible moment. In Ouagadougou cafes, people joke with half-grins that Traoré must sleep with one eye open, because history hasn't been kind to African leaders who try to change the global economic script. Still, there's an unmistakable sense that this time might be different. Social media is buzzing not just within Burkina Faso but across the Sahel and beyond. Videos of new substations, local workers laying lines, children squealing as they switch on their first electric fan. They've gone viral in Mali, Niger, even Liberia. You can see the questions forming in the comments. Why can't we do this too? It's that contagious hope, not the steel towers or transformers, that might be the biggest threat to the old order.
Traoré is trying to rewrite what's possible. His plan revolves around the Mohun River, a broad waterway that cuts through Burkina Faso's rugged terrain. Where others saw difficult land and seasonal floods, Traoré saw potential. The idea is to build a system of 11 enormous dams along this river. Together, they'll form the backbone of a smart electric grid that's set to deliver clean power across 15 West African countries. It's not just about lighting homes, it's about powering schools, hospitals, businesses, and farms. In short, it's about giving millions of people a fair shot at building a better life. When first announced, the $800 billion price tag triggered more skepticism than excitement. How could a nation that's wrestled with poverty and relied heavily on foreign aid possibly afford such an undertaking? Critics in Western capitals dismissed it outright. But Traoré pressed on, framing this not as an act of desperation, but as a deliberate choice.
Do you know what terrifies old power empires the most? It's not losing a contract. It's watching people who used to bow their heads start walking with their chins high, and inspiring millions more to do the same. As Burkina Faso's power grid flickers across new towns and dusty stretches of farmland, the shockwaves aren't stopping at Africa's shores. In boardrooms from Paris to Frankfurt, strategy teams are racing to update forecasts, because for decades, Africa's energy landscape was their steady, predictable cash cow. They designed it that way. Large, imported turbines, foreign-managed transmission companies, generations of engineers trained in Europe who'd return with loyalties, or at least ingrained deference, to European systems. It was all neat, stable, profitable. Now Burkina Faso is breaking that script with ruthless simplicity. Build your own, run your own, keep most of the profits. And it's not just about economics. Western governments, especially France and Germany, have long used energy infrastructure deals as leverage, a discreet but powerful form of diplomacy. Need a renegotiation on military basing rights? Well, we're also overseeing your power network upgrade, remember? Need pressure off during an election crisis? Let's make sure your next phase of grid expansion gets that loan guarantee. Take that tool away, and a major pillar of post-colonial influence starts to crumble. It's no wonder white papers are now circulating in European capitals warning of an uncontrolled pivot among Francophone Africa, driven by new power independence. Meanwhile, multinational energy giants, who once scoffed at the idea of local African-led utility corporations, are suddenly sending low-key delegations to Ouagadougou, offering joint ventures, tech sharing, even partial ownership flips to keep a foot in the door. Some have pivoted to offering smart grid software packages, hoping that if they can't own the lines, at least they can own the data. But here's what's truly astonishing. Burkina Faso is saying no to many of them. They're willing to partner, but on small slices, and under new ground rules where foreign companies are essentially subcontractors, not gatekeepers. A senior advisor to Traoré recently put it bluntly,
"If you want a piece of our grid, you'll have to accept that it's our grid. We decide how it's used, priced, expanded. Those days of 50-year concessions are over."
That's revolutionary talk in a continent still scarred by concession contracts that funneled billions outward while local hospitals went dark. But it's not without danger. There are credible reports that sabotage attempts have already been thwarted. Just last month, security forces quietly detained a group of technicians trying to infiltrate a substation outside Koudougou, carrying specialized equipment that could disrupt remote operations. Was it industrial espionage? State-backed mischief? No official statement has named names, but insiders whisper this is likely only the beginning. At the same time, certain economic advisory bodies tied to Europe have begun pushing Burkina Faso's regional banks to tighten loan rules, hoping to strangle financing lines indirectly. The pressure is subtle, the statements cloaked in talk of prudential standards. But everyone knows what's really at play. Yet for all these dark currents, the ordinary people of Burkina Faso are defiantly, even joyfully, pressing ahead. Drive through the outskirts of Ouagadougou after sunset and you'll see it. Kids doing homework under street lamps that never existed here before. Small metal workshops humming late into the night. Markets open after dark without the punishing roar of diesel generators. Ask them what this means, and the answers tumble out, sometimes laughing, sometimes tearful.
It means we can dream bigger.
It means I can refrigerate medicine for my mother.
It means we finally own something nobody can take away.
In dusty churches and crowded mosques, preachers now weave power lines into sermons about dignity and God's blessings. Local musicians write songs praising the lights. Teachers no longer dismiss afternoon classes early because fans stop turning. It's as if electricity itself has become a living symbol of hope. Meanwhile, across the region, young activists from Mali to Guinea are visiting Burkina Faso, some literally sneaking over borders, to see the new substations, talk to engineers, take videos and post them with captions like, "Imagine this in Bamako, imagine this in Conakry, it's spreading." And maybe that's the most profound shift of all. Because long after the final transformers are installed, long after foreign consultants stop scheming, the real power might not be in the kilowatts flowing through copper wires. It's in the simple, unstoppable idea that Africa can build for itself on its own terms, without bowing to old empires or their threats. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What do you think? Is this the start of a new chapter for Africa, or will old powers find a way to claw it back? Hit subscribe, like this video, and share it widely so more people can see how the winds are finally changing across our continent.